I think we can get started. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Tian Tran, and I'm the Director of Marketing here at Soberlink. And I'm so excited to welcome you all to today's webinar on guiding clients through alcohol-involved divorce contemplation. Before we get started, I wanted to go over some housekeeping items. If you have any questions or comments, please use the Q&A feature. The chat's not on for this webinar, but I'll be moderating the Q&A and I'll send off questions and comments to our panelists. We do have some time at the end to answer those live, and anything that we don't get to, we will answer in a post-webinar email. So go ahead and send all those questions and comments. Okay, so let's get started with introductions. Today we have the wonderful Kate Anthony, a renowned divorce coach and author who is certified as a domestic violence victims advocate by the state of California and as a high conflict divorce coach. Having navigated her own divorce, she brings a unique blend of personal and professional experience to the field. We also have Soberlink's very own Chris Beck, Vice President of Business Development, who has attended hundreds of events and presentations with the goal of educating family law professionals on best practices for alcohol monitoring. Being a foster parent himself, Chris brings his own personal experience and passion for child safety to the field. And I will let you both take it from here. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tian. Chris, did you have anything that you want to say before I launch into my
No, I just wanted to say that, it's great to be here with you, and I appreciate the time that you're giving us to talk on this topic. And I think it's going to be a very fruitful discussion for everyone that's watching today.
Great. Thank you so much. I'm so happy to be here. I love partnering with you, as you know. Full disclosure, just for sort of context, I am, as Tian said, a high conflict divorce coach and a domestic violence victims advocate, among other things. I'm a co-parenting specialist as well. So, and I primarily work with women, and I work with women who are contemplating whether to stay or go. And then I also work as a divorce coach with women who have made the decision. I recently wrote a book called The D Word, Making the Ultimate Decision About Your Marriage. This is unfortunately an enormous topic that I see in my practice a lot. And so, there are certain things that I see from the coach's perspective, right, that I think is different from perhaps what you might see on the attorney side of things. And I think that when people who are just trying to decide whether to stay in or leave a marriage, one of the first things that they're going to do, hopefully, is consult with an attorney. And what I have been told by my attorney colleagues and friends is that they're kind of the wrong person. I think it's a wonderful idea that one of the first things that I recommend is you must consult an attorney because you need to know the lay of the land, but also an attorney is not qualified necessarily to help you make this decision, right? No offense or shade to all the attorneys here, it's just not part of your training or background, right? So I work with hundreds of women a year for whom this is an enormous issue. I think for most people, right, I think we can all agree that if someone comes to us and they're contemplating divorce, they're probably already on the other side, right? People who are in really healthy, happy marriages don't question whether they should stay or go. So if they're already having this conversation, if they're already calling me, showing up in my Facebook group, reading my book, or calling you, probably the decision is already somewhere, has already been made. It's just they are looking for information. They're looking for logistics. They're looking for what their life is going to look like on the other side. And very often, for me, they're looking for permission. And this is a huge part of my message to women. I work with women, so I'm going to try and not be so gendered about the language that I use. And because I work with women, I think the idea of permission is a really huge one, especially for moms. Do we get to put our own health and happiness first? Do we get to opt out of a relationship that isn't serving us when it serves maybe the family, maybe the greater good? Are we allowed to choose? For women, this can be a really difficult thing, just from a cultural perspective. You know, we are raised to wait for boys to ask us to dance. We're raised for boys to ask us on dates, for men to ask us to marry them. So the idea that we can choose is pretty radical for many women. When dealing with contemplating ending a marriage, when alcohol is involved and is a factor and a concern, women in particular, well, and I think anyone, that's actually not true. Anyone, a primary concern, of course, is for the children, right? If I stay, I can protect them. I can mitigate any of the safety concerns. I can do all the driving. I can do all of that stuff, right? But am I keeping them in this toxicity for too long? If I go, how can I protect them, right? And that's where Soberlink is such an incredibly useful tool. You know, many people, they're terrified of leaving their children unsupervised with a parent who drinks. And anybody who has loved someone who drinks has probably been trying to get their spouse to stop for any number of years. And if they're sitting in your office, if they're coming to me, they're probably they've reached the end of their rope, but they don't know what to do. They don't know how to get help. Right? The heartbreaking part is that really they love their spouses so much, right? They really, really do. Most people, nobody wants to get divorced if they're at this point. You know, they probably feel like there's no other option. One of the first things that I work with my clients on is this concept of radical acceptance, and really understanding the impact that alcohol use disorder or excessive drinking or living with somebody whose drinking is impacting the family dynamic. You know, understand, like, having a radical acceptance of this is the fact. These are the facts. This is the life, right? When we're trying to get someone to stop drinking, very often we're actually pushing them further into their behaviors for a variety of reasons, right? Almost no one ever quits drinking or gets help for their addiction because of someone else's nagging. Like, that's just not how addiction works, unfortunately. Right, Chris?
You're absolutely right. I'm always even amazed at some of the statistics that I see around alcohol use disorder and those who actually go and get treatment. I mean, it's less than 10%. I mean, that is staggering to me.
Right. And almost always when they have basic, you know, their bottom is not because my wife has nagged me. Their bottom is because I've lost everything.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Their bottom is my wife left me and took the kids, or my husband left, and, you know, like, whatever right? It's rarely because somebody told me I had to.
No, you're right.
Right. So there was in 2011, and this is a long time ago, but there was a multinational study of mental disorders in marriage and divorce. And it showed that marriages in which there is addiction or mental illness have a much higher rate of divorce. Not exactly shocking. But depending on some variables, and they're fairly large variables, the study put the increase between 20 and 80%. So alcohol abuse, major depression, including bipolar disorder, and PTSD had the largest impact on marriage. So this is really an enormous issue in the contemplation stage. Did you want to add to that, Chris? No, okay.
No, you're spot on. Keep going.
Yeah. And so the largest factor for the increase in the divorce rate in these marriages that are affected is someone not seeking treatment, right? So when someone comes to me and they're contemplating making this decision, there are three questions that I ask. The first is, does your partner recognize that they have an addiction? Do they want help for their addiction? And are they actively seeking that help on their own? Right. And listen, that can mean going into rehab, into a 12-step program, or, you know, I am a sober person who did not get sober in a 12-step room, but I, you know, read a lot of books, and because I don't identify as the way that alcoholism is described in the, you know, in the big book, in the 12 steps, I relate to everything from some other programs, which is not this one. And so, you know, there are a lot of ways to do this. But the question is, are they actively seeking help, right? And so someone who seeks treatment is aware and they're taking responsibility for it. And that is the first crucial step. So if someone is sitting in your office and they're really not sure what to do, and alcohol use is a huge factor in this, the first thing I would say is to ask these questions. These are clarifying questions for somebody who is confused, you know? And I think so many people think that there's just one more thing. There's one more thing that I can say or do that will make a difference and that will make me not have to go down this road. And unfortunately, that is, I think, one of the things that makes us crazy. So, you know, alcoholism is described in AA and other places as a family disease, right? Because often genetics play a huge piece in this, right? So it's a family disease in terms of like how it is passed on through generations, but it's also a family disease in the way that it impacts the entire family. And so when you're dealing with somebody whose drinking bothers you, it actually changes us. It changes the person who lives with the drinker or the addict, or the person with mental health issues that are untreated, right? I mean, because we start to try to control, we are we're trying to mitigate the damage, we're running interference, we are you know, sort of shutting the curtain and for trying to protect the family, and we end up acting in ways that are not in line with our authentic selves and who we are, and in line with our own values very often. And so I think one of the first things that it's important to recommend to people is to seek help for themselves, whether that's through Al-Anon. If those aren't familiar, Al-Anon is the 12-step the sort of sister program to AA, which is for friends and families of alcoholics. So these are people whose lives have been affected. Al-Anon was started by the wives of the men who started AA, because they were in the kitchen sort of, you know, making coffee for once their husbands finally got sober. Their whole lives were spent trying to get these men sober, and then they finally got sober, and then they kind of lost their identity. And they found themselves in the kitchen serving coffee to these men who they were already like alcohol widows, and now they're AA widows, and they have sort of lost their whole identity. They're sober, but now they're spending all this time with with these other men in meetings and not at home with us, and realizing that they had lost so much of their identity in the process of trying to get them sober, that now that they were sober, like, oh, who am I now? And so that they realized that the 12 steps that were used to form AA might actually help for them. And they found that they did. And it's a really wonderful program for people. You know, I'm not endorsing it. This is an option available to people that gives a lot of useful information and help and insight. There's plenty of other ways to go about this as well. But the most important thing, I think, is that people do the work for themselves, right? Like, and this comes back to this radical acceptance piece of, if this is the truth of my marriage, because you don't have to leave someone who's drinking bothers you, right? But you might have to shift your expectations for what that relationship is going to be. So you can't make someone stop. You can't make them even want to stop. It has to be their choice. And this should be, now it's time to put the focus back on yourself. Who do you want to be in your life, in your relationships, and as a parent, primarily, really? So education on understanding addiction is really crucial at this point for people who are, you know, sitting in your office trying to make this decision, not really knowing where to go. And truly understanding that addiction isn't a choice can help people make the decision that may not be as emotional as it might otherwise have been, right? So it could be that, you know, you've spent all of this time, this person has spent all of this time trying to get their spouse to stop drinking. And it has been so emotional. Don't you understand? If you loved us, why, you know, all of these pieces, if you really loved us, why are you endangering us? Why, like, we don't have any intimacy, all of these things. And when you actually step back and they learn what addiction really is and get the education that's necessary to understand what's happening for the addict, it can be really crucial in taking the emotions out of it and making a reasoned decision for their, you know, for their family, for their children. I wanted to read you a little something from my book about addiction. So, and understanding addiction. Chris, do you want to chime in anything here, or
No, you're good.
okay.
Thanks.
So addiction is one of the most widely misunderstood diseases in the world. Many people believe that addicts lack the willpower to quit their bad habits, and that if they really wanted to, they could stop at any time. Unfortunately, nothing could be further from the truth. For most addicts, the addictive cycles in the brain cancel out all choice whatsoever. Addiction is, in essence, like any other disease, such as diabetes, heart disease, or cancer. As with other diseases, one of the most common signs for diagnosing or predetermining a propensity toward addiction is family history. This fact negates the idea that addiction could be a choice at all. No one would wake up one day and choose to become an addict any more than they would choose to become diabetic. Addicts may make a choice to use initially, often because of some other mental or physical health issues. But over time, and often not very much time, the genetic predisposition for the disease takes over and choice is eliminated. Supporting the idea that addiction is a mental disease rather than a choice, or the ideas that addiction affects the addict's brain, impacting their ability to function normally, and that even when the substance is removed from the addict, they usually require ongoing recovery work so as not to relapse. If it were just a choice, their brains would go back to normal, and once they stopped using, it would be as if they never used at all. So it's right and necessary to have compassion for an addict. That being said, it is also right and necessary to recognize that you have no power to make another person get the help that's needed to recover from their disease. If you loved a diabetic and they refused to see a doctor, and continued to eat too many carbs, even though they knew it would kill them, there would be little you could do to stop them. You could cook only healthy low-carb foods at home, but if they walk out the door and go to the donut shop on their way to work, you're powerless to stop them. Just as you can't do medical work for a diabetic, you can't do recovery work for an addict. So, I think this is what I'm talking about in terms of the understanding and the education around addiction. This isn't so that, we can it is so that we can understand the addict better, right? Of course. And also it is so that we can make a more reasoned choice about our marriages, and it's important for us to do as well, right? As professionals who are guiding these people, to help them understand what's really going on, so that we can take the emotion out of it, be a little bit more objective, and make a more reasoned decision about it. One of the things that's really important is that a lot of people think that staying in a marriage in which there is excessive use of alcohol or any form of toxicity for the kids is the best idea. For everybody, protecting children should be the top priority and the primary consideration. Whether that's staying in the marriage or leaving the marriage, the research shows that staying in a toxic marriage for the children is actually doing them a disservice. The research shows that separating and having two homes, even if only one of them is safe, is better for children. Now, that is not to say that you should just send your children half the time to an unsafe home. But what you're doing is you're actually giving them the gift of perspective. You've got one home in which they feel safe, they feel heard, they feel loved. They've got another home in which they may not feel safe, they may not feel heard and loved and all of those things. And so you're giving them this gift of perspective, that I feel one way here and I feel another way here. And this is how we allow children to grow up to be adults that have choice in the kinds of relationships that they develop later in life. This is, if you stay in the toxicity, in the alcohol-fueled environment, and keep them there 100% of the time, this is what they know. That's it. You're actually not, the sober person is actually not mitigating anything. They're not protecting the children at all. They're simply giving them the false understanding that this is what love is, this is what marriage is, this is what a relationship is. So separating could be better for children as long as it's done in a healthy, non-toxic way. But the top priority is protecting the children when they are in this other person's home. And the best way to do that is by using an alcohol monitoring system like Soberlink. So one of the things that, this is just full disclosure, this is something that is used in my family. I recommended it to a member of my family to say, like, listen, this is the only way we're going to be able to protect this child in our family. And it has done its job numerous times. This child would have been in so much danger in my family. He's 12 years old now, and there's actually California law was that my family set precedents in California by being the first case for a judge to rule to agree to agree to use Soberlink indefinitely. So usually there's like a timeline on it, but our case was so sort of crazy that they have actually the judge set precedence by ruling that it could be used and recommended indefinitely. So these are my thoughts on the really when if somebody is sitting in your office and they are contemplating this and they don't really know whether what answers to give for somebody contemplating divorce and saying, I think it's important for attorneys to know what guardrails we can actually put into place. That it's not like, well, if you get divorced, you're basically leaving your child, in danger and to the wolves, right? There are guardrails that can be put in place. There are mandates that are possible and they work. Truly, I partner with Soberlink. Full disclosure, they are a sponsor of my podcast. I don't work with brands that I don't really believe in. I cannot tell you how much I recommend Soberlink because it is the best guardrail that I know of to put in place to protect children. And by the way, it is also a beautiful thing for when somebody does get sober to say, I want to use this because I want to show you how seriously I take my sobriety and our children's safety. So if the person is an addict, it's a great way to, or has alcohol use disorder or just drinks too much, right? To be able to say to their soon-to-be ex, to their partner, hey, you know what? I get it. I get it. I definitely have this history, and I want to show you how seriously I take protecting my children. So, with that, Chris, I think can I turn this over to you?
Absolutely. Sure.
Yeah.
I love what you said about education on addiction. I think that is some of the key elements to this entire conversation, because without that education, I still hear people thinking that it's a moral failing, and it is not. It is not by any means. And, every education that I do, I always talk about how we need to be mindful of the disease of alcohol use disorder and the things that it does. Your comment on radical acceptance, I think, or it was radical.
Yeah, that was it. Radical acceptance.
Yeah, acceptance. Yes. I scribbled a little bit on that one. So
sorry
about that. But I really resonated with that too, because I do see how it impacts others and how other people kind of make exceptions instead of dealing with what's in front of them. And I think that's important to know. Typically when we see allegations that are brought up, during the divorce, it's brought up during the divorce proceedings that are taking place because they're trying to decide on time sharing for the kiddos. Another time that we see it most often that they're thinking about Soberlink is maybe there's an emergency motion has been filed after the divorce has been finalized, as a reason to modify that parenting time because of this newfound allegations of alcohol abuse. But I do think that one of the most underutilized parts of our system or unutilized times that we could use Soberlink is actually before all of this happens, right? Before the even we think about contemplating divorce. And I think that's kind of the things that I want to touch on just a little bit as we go forward. One of my favorite uses of a Soberlink is what I call the proactive approach. And typically in this scenario, the two parties are still married and accusations about one's relationship with alcohol is in question. And at this point, that trust, right? That trust in the relationship has been fractured. It's been broken apart. And now the conversation becomes challenging. And with that, gosh, quickly, the other person, it becomes on the defensive, where you mentioned how the conversations become so difficult at that point, right? And I mean, they're almost toxic because there's allegations and someone's in denial. And at what point is this person actually in? So man, these conversations quickly get difficult to have.
Yeah.
And that's why I listened very carefully to what you said, because you want to try to avoid getting to that tipping point, I think, if you can. But
Yeah.
with challenging conversations, I think what we need to do is figure out how to use Soberlink or technologies like Soberlink to assist in mending the fracture that has taken place. If Soberlink is correctly used, it can either identify the problem. And when I say identify the problem, maybe sometimes we see people are blind to what is happening because of the power of the addiction, right? And then we can also see that maybe there is not a problem. Maybe it is just accusational because we're seeing compliant behavior with the Soberlink system. So I think that's very important. And in my mind, for the person who's going to be submitting the test, I mean, that's a win-win. Okay. I proved that I have a problem. Okay, that's it might seem like failure, but it's not. It's identified what's happening. And now we can have a fruitful conversation around it.
Yeah.
If we talk about hey, there is compliant behavior, maybe the discussion needs to be frameworked where I don't believe we have a problem and we're seeing that we have compliant behavior. So different ways to look at it. So when we talk about proactive monitoring, with attorneys, we always discuss what level would be best for them, which program would be best for them within the Soberlink kind of landscape, right? And I always suggest a level 2 basic program at the very start. So our level 2 basic program allows the monitored client person submitting the test to take 2 to 3 tests per day on a schedule. And at that time, they're able to, give those results the next day to whoever's part of the monitoring agreement. Now, we do offer real-time results in our next level up in either plus or premium. And I just don't know if the conversation has gotten to that, or if they're even living in the home at this point, because sometimes they're trying to get back there, or maybe there's no kids at all. So it just depends where the conversation might be. But we do offer those 2 other plans where you can get real-time results. And if that's the case where the kids are in the house and you're having unsupervised parenting time, that's where I would recommend you start, because we do make sure that we help keep these kiddos safe. So our best practice around our level 2 program is that it consists of either 2 or 3 tests per day. And that would be with the first test being when you wake in the morning and the last test before you go to bed. If there's a third test, what you want to do is you want to put that third test in between the first and last tests of the day. All right, that's our best practice for 2 to 3 tests per day on a schedule. The other program that we offer is a level 1 program, which is designed a little bit differently because it's designed around parenting time only. Okay, it's limited to 20 testing days in a calendar month. And, so what we want to do is only test when we have the kids, when we have that unsupervised visitation. All right. So with that, the client will be able to drink when they're not with the kid. So we need to be mindful of that situation. So what I think this is for is someone that maybe is a social drinker, maybe had an episode that might lead them to have some concern, or maybe that there's just hearsay. And that's where we have to be mindful of what program that we're signing these clients up to. But best practice for our level 1 program would suggest that you test 1 hour to 30 minutes prior to the parenting time period, maybe test every 4 hours during the parenting time. And then lastly, immediately after the parenting time has concluded. So now you have documented sobriety for the entire parenting time that has taken place. All right. And that's super important, because if we can establish sobriety during parenting time, then we can establish that we are parenting in a sober way, in a responsible way. And that's really what the device is there for, to empower that individual to say, hey, this is what's happening, and here are the results. So let's talk a little bit about the technology that we have, and I can get into that. We have two different devices. We have a Soberlink cellular device, and then we have a Soberlink Bluetooth device, which we call Connect, okay? The devices are slightly different. The main benefit of the Soberlink cellular device is that it's an all-in-one device, all right? It's plug and play. It does not require a smartphone to submit a test. This device actually uses a cell chip that's inside to connect with a tower to send the results in real time to anyone that's part of the monitoring agreement. Also, it will store tests, and that's super important because, you know, sometimes we have people that live in rural areas, or I like to fish. I'm out on a fishing trip, no cell service to where I fish. So, you know, it's good to see a system that can store tests, and then once it comes back into cell reception, it will download each and every test with a timestamp. So that's super important. Now, the Soberlink Connect device, it requires a smartphone to be paired with a smartphone app that is free in either the iStore or Android store. And what happens is that once you pair it, you can then submit the test. Now, the benefits of that is that you can either have on your cell phone a cell connection or a Wi-Fi connection. And that's kind of unique too, because sometimes you go places where they don't have cell connection, but they will have Wi-Fi service, and that's kind of nice. So you can submit tests even with Wi-Fi service. So let me show you how testing works, and let's just make sure I'm sober. Okay, hold on. That's the fun part. This is the fun part about this right now. All right. So what I do is I open up the app. The app is on my iPhone here. I turn on the device. You'll see the light come on up top here. I have to make sure that I hold the straw parallel to the ground so that I get a green light to flash. And then once I see the green light, I can submit the test. So on the app, you'll see here, it says submit test. I hit that button, submit. We see the green light flashing. So I got to keep it inside my body, the green light flashing, and then I can submit the test. As I was actually submitting the test, the camera here was using facial recognition software to confirm my identity. And that's really important to make sure because, you know, when we talk about alcohol use disorder and we talk about the disease, it does play tricks on you, and it does tell you that, you know, we'll do whatever it takes to have our next drink. So we need to make sure that the technology that we're using for monitoring has robust tamper detection technology. So also inside our system are sensors such as temperature and pressure sensors to help ensure that it is human breath and not something from an outside source, okay? So now that my testing is complete, I see on my app that, yes, I am sober today. Okay, but I'm typically sober. And I have a 0.00 BAC, all right? But that's how simple it is to complete the test. And then right now, my wife is actually getting an email that says that I have submitted a test and I have submitted a compliant test with a 0.00 BAC. So that's really important that she's able to get that information 30 seconds after I took the test. So if I was with my kiddos and I was unsupervised and she wasn't there, she would know that I am with my kids and I am parenting them under sober conditions. So again, all of this is really to earn that trust back. It needs to be earned. I can't tell you how important that is. You know, you can purchase our technology, but you got to put in the work. I think that's really where it's at. And I heard a little bit of that listening to Kate a little bit earlier. So I also want to talk a little bit about some sober stories. It's one of my favorite sections when I look at our website, and to go through some of the validation of what I do every day is educate professionals like yourselves that are out there. But when I see the stories coming back from individuals, that's where I get kind of like a, man, I want to come to work tomorrow and I want to do the same thing and I want to make sure I reach more people. And so I'm going to start with a story from a lady named Ruth. All right. Ruth had developed really an abusive relationship with alcohol. And I use the term relationship with alcohol a lot, so I hope no one gets offended by that. But abusive relationship with alcohol is what happened, and it led to the contemplation of divorce from her husband. And this poor relationship with alcohol was not only with her, didn't only affect her husband, but it did affect her two young kiddos. So she decided to be proactive. And during these discussions, she decided that she needed to go out and get help. And then a therapist from a treatment facility that she attended recommended Soberlink. Said that this would help prove to her husband that she was staying, sober and on target with her program. And I think what she stated, and I'll quote her here. It says, "I needed external forces to prove that I could stay sober. Trust takes time to gain back, but Soberlink has allowed us to have trust back in our relationship." And I just thought those were really strong words. Trust takes time to gain back. We mentioned that a little bit earlier, but she understood what had to be done and what needed to be done to make sure that she put in the time and the effort to earn that trust back, so that she could have these conversations that were fruitful with her husband to really, I guess, strengthen that relationship. What was once fractured is now mended. So super important that she was able to get that back. And, now her marriage is thriving, and, she has earned the trust back from her husband. Right. The other story that I got just two more. So bear with me, because again, I love this stuff. But the second sober story is from a gentleman named Dustin. Okay. Now Justin was being falsely accused. So a little bit different, something that we don't see often, but sometimes we do get accused of having some issues. And he was able to prove his sobriety during his parenting time to keep custody of his kids. So he did a level 1 program, and he actually did it for 2 years. I mean, that seems like a long time, but he knew that this is what he needed to do to make sure he earned that trust, make sure that he was proving that he could be sober during the parenting time and unsupervised parenting time that he had. And what was so exciting to him was that he had come so far. And then he even mentioned that his teenage daughters, as they grew up, they actually decided that they wanted to move in with him. And he was all smiles and tears from that. So it was really, really touching. His 2 years of sobriety during that parenting time really showed to his ex-wife that he didn't have an abusive relationship with alcohol. He does admit to having, a couple beers or social drinking. And, during his 2 years of testing, he showed compliant behavior that, told everyone that there was no abusive drinking that negatively affected his parenting or the safety of his kiddos. So a little bit different way of looking at it, but, he was able to use the technology to empower himself to prove what he already knew. And I think that's important. And, maybe there was an episode of abusive. We don't know all the facts, but we saw over a 2-year period, he was able to, each time he had his kiddos with him unsupervised, he was able to, prove his sobriety. And lastly, I want to talk about a lady named Jen. Jen is one of my favorite, I guess, testimonies or sober story that we have on our website, because she speaks to our product from the point of view of the concerned party, the person who's getting the results. And I think that's kind of, Kate, that's where you stem from most of the conversation. And she unfortunately is divorced, but that's okay. They went through the process, the contemplation, and it just decided to move on. But the the other parent is still on Soberlink, and she talks about how it gives her peace in mind each time her phone buzzes. And I didn't really understand that at first, but she's getting email alerts, and she's setting the the alert to buzz. So every time she got that buzz, it put a smile on her face because she knew that her ex-partner, ex-partner was sober and that her kids were safe. And I think that strengthened, their relationship. And I think that's what excites her, is that now she can co-parent with her ex and have a better relationship going forward. And not only will that be good for them, but it would be good for those kiddos, because now those kiddos are going to be involved in a relationship that's built on trust. And that's what's going to make those kids be successful, right?
I could not agree more.
Yeah, yeah. I
Chris,
think that works.
Can you address though what happens when there is when there is a positive test, and what happens then? Because I think that's,
Absolutely. And
that's
I'm
where things
happy
get
to.
tricky.
Yes. So our system is designed as a zero tolerance system. So if you get a positive test above 0.005, so 0.006 and above, we'll report a positive event, okay, a positive test. And then what happens is our system will go into what's called a retest cycle. It's really important. And it's really important to understand what the retest cycle is, because it's there for not only the monitor client, but it's there for the concerned party as well. It's there to help both parties. I think one thing that really Soberlink prides themselves is that we're Switzerland here. We're trying to empower an individual that has AUD, but we're also trying to keep kids safe and give peace of mind to the other parent. So to go on, what happens is that we consider that first test a screening test once it has a positive, and they are asked to retest to validate that positive. If they test 15 minutes later positive, then alerts go out to everybody that says there has been a non-compliant test. All right. But let's say the monitor client used Listerine, an old form of Listerine that still has alcohol in it, right? You can buy stuff now that doesn't have alcohol in it, but back in the day, it only came with alcohol in it. So if they blew into the system right after they brushed their teeth, it would register a positive. But after 15 minutes of a lockout period where the device does not allow you to test, and then you're able to test 15 minutes later, that alcohol, which was in your mouth cavity, will have dissipated. The research on that suggests that mouth alcohol dissipates in 2 to 3 minutes. So our 15 minutes is plenty of time for that accidental exposure or incidental exposure to be eliminated from your mouth cavity. So when you retest, you can retest, and if it's compliant, then we'll see that event as a compliant event. All right. So it eliminates that noise that sometimes people call false positives. But let's just say on the flip side, before you confirm the test with a positive, now it's a positive, we ask you to continue to test until you test compliant or you've reached 6 maximum tests. So that also looks at different data points on how the alcohol is eliminating in your body. And then we can see if that elimination is consistent with that of consumed alcohol. I hope that answered that question.
Yeah. And so once when there's a positive, then it alerts the other party, right? If this is a co-parenting, right, it will alert the other party. And then how does it, I know in my family, there's positive, visits are canceled immediately. My ex-husband goes and gets his other son, and brings him home, but he has full legal and physical custody, and she has visitation, which I think is a
You're absolutely right. That parenting plans are designed differently, and different people have different situations where how to react to positives. Sometimes there's a neutral involved that will go pick up the kiddos. Sometimes the relationship between the co-parents is such that it's okay for the one parent to go and pick up. But I think it really depends on the two parties. And that's why we feel it's so important to have these two parties involved and sign a monitoring agreement up front. If they can understand what the expectations are for Soberlink, it really makes sure that we get to a successful point in the monitoring program.
Yeah. Yeah. It's not, it's not pleasant to get a positive test result and then have to go take a child out of the home of the other parent. It's no good for anybody, but sometimes it's necessary. But also, as you say, the parenting plan itself needs to be worked out in a way that addresses these issues. And so it's not, from my end, right, as a divorce coach that, helps my clients craft these parenting plans along with their attorneys, it can't be cut and paste, right? It's got to be, and then what, and then what, and what are the incidentals? What are the backup plans? All, the amount of stuff that you have to think through in these cases it's a lot. It's a lot.
It
And
is
of
a lot,
course,
and
we can't
it
think
is
of
a lot.
everything,
Yeah,
right?
and I will even say that there's different ways that you should address, like let's say you're in our level 2 program and you get a missed test alert. That means that they missed their testing window. Our system defaults to these 2-hour windows. So let's say you have a test at 8 a.m. in the morning, your window opens at 7:45 and it closes at 10. If you do not test, it will alert all of the people that are part of the monitoring agreement that you missed a test. How do you deal with those missed tests? In our best practice paper, it says that we should think about that early on in the program to address how it's affecting and the testing schedule is affecting that person's daily schedule and how it's interfering with their daily schedule, or is it something broader? Is there other problems? It gives you a reason to go back and discuss the program that you've set up. And I think that's really important because when you start an alcohol monitoring program, it is extremely difficult. That's the first 3 weeks is going to be really tough for that individual because not only is this a new program, but they have to get an understanding of what's happening and they have to start creating habits. And it takes a while for the brain to create new habits and to adhere to those new things. I mean, just picking my kids up from school, I mean, after a long summer, I'm like, wait a minute, what time am I supposed to pick up my kids? I know it's
How
not
many
the
kids do
same
I have?
thing, but yeah, I mean, does it take me 10 minutes to get to school? Or, I got all sorts of things running through my head. So,
Yeah, yeah.
I get it. And I think that that's important to set up. And you're right. When we see parenting plans, it's always good to continue to write to make sure that you address a lot of the things that are going to happen. Remember that when we're dealing with people with alcohol use disorder, 70% of these people are going to probably go through a relapse. That means they're going to have a positive test. So we never want our system to be such that we're taking kids away from parents. We want it to be a way to say, hey, we want to keep them safe, but we also want to keep that parent in that child's life. And that's super important to us.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. And I think that, goes to sort of these reasonable expectations when having consultations with clients or when working with clients from an attorney perspective, from a coaching perspective, setting up reasonable expectations, because I know the number of people that I work with that are like, I want full custody because of XYZ. And from a parent, like, protective mama bear thing, like, yes, that makes sense. And also, it's just not how the law works. So it's very unlikely that you are going to get full custody and full protection. And also, it's not always best for your kids. It's not best for your kids for them to be taken away from a parent entirely. And it's really hard for some people to wrap their head around that and why that would be okay and why that would be best for their children. And so the more time I think that we can take as professionals in this space to educate our clients and explain to them what the research is and why that's not best for their kids. I think we have, like, easing them into that. And I think this is also, a good shout out for my people and for divorce coaches, like, right, because that's our job, right? That is, as far as I'm concerned, it's part of my job is to take their concerns and then what the law says, and then help them understand why and what the research says, and to really help them come to acceptance, to this radical acceptance about how it really works, but also why it's okay, why this is not, it's not in the best interest of your children to be completely removed from one of their parents.
I love that. Yeah, no, absolutely. Absolutely. If we can educate everybody on that and think about, there's all these new technologies that are out there, right? And we don't want to use these technologies as weapons. We don't want to weaponize ourselves. That is something that we want to stay very far away from. So we need to make sure that we educate. I mean, that's what we're here for. And we want to make sure that we're not saying that someone should test 10 times per day and only have a 2-minute window. Things like this are just like crazy. And that would be weaponizing our technology, Soberlink technology. We have best practices. They're located on our website. I think Tian, who is with us today, she will post some of that stuff and send it out afterwards so everyone has access to it. But man, if we could get the word out more and more, I think that's going to be better for families and better for all those kiddos involved.
Absolutely. Could not agree more. I wanted to sort of touch a little bit on, we sort of started talking about this a little bit, but the psychological impact of divorce on children. And so I touched on this a little bit. We've just been talking about it a little bit, but, there is this misconception that divorce screws up kids. Unfortunately, there was a book published, I think in 2000 by a woman named Judith Wallerstein, all about how divorce screws up children. And her research turned out to be flawed, not peer-reviewed. The content was taken from one county in one state with like 20 people or something. It was a very, it was not research. And so it did create this narrative somehow, because it, I think, played into people's worst fears and all of the things. It really held a lot of weight. So much, I mean, my couples therapists, when I was going through the, many years of agonizing whether or not to leave my marriage. By the way, the average person, I think, the average length of time people contemplate this is something like 4 years. It's a lot.
Wow.
Yeah.
I didn't know that. That's great.
Yeah, that's what Susan Guthrie told me that, and I was like,
Okay.
but I believe it because that's kind of how long I was agonizing, and and then you have a kid, and it's like it kind of pushes it further out because we believe that divorce is going to screw up our kids. The false research states that kids from, quote, broken homes, love that, end up to be addicts later in life. They fail out of school. They have relationship problems later in life and all of this. The truth is, the actual facts are, the real research suggests that in the short term, of course, children from divorced families are impacted. They might suffer some, depression and anxiety throughout the transition. If they are well supported by one or preferably both parents, if they have therapy, if they are, all the things that we know to do now in the 21st century that nobody knew how to do, when I was a kid, they will, in the long term, there is very little difference in the how they manage stress and relationships and all of those things, and mental health disorders. There's negligible difference. in these two population groups, kids whose parents stayed together and kids whose parents got divorced. The problem is not divorce. The problem is toxicity. The thing that will screw up kids is toxicity, either in an intact family or in a divorced family. So if you've got two parents, and this is sort of is what I talked about earlier with the people being being in one home together, then you've got the toxicity is 100%, right? So even if one person is, you know, a sober parent or whatever, if they're together, it's toxic. But if they get divorced and it's still really toxic, and the kids are getting put at the center, in the middle, not at the center, but if they're being put in the middle and they're being fought over, they're being used as pawns, all of that, that's going to screw up your kid. But and the research shows that only one parent needs to be sort of a stable, safe place for these kids to land. It's ideal for both parents to be, of course. And even if only one is, they're going to be okay.
Yeah.
So the psychological impact of divorce on children, as long as we support them, as long as we give them, you know, therapy, like please get your kids therapy. It's really hard nowadays. Since the pandemic, therapists are hard to find. They're, you know, almost impossible to get into. The good ones are overwhelmed. It's really difficult, but we've got to find, and if that's the case, then okay, then you become your own child's therapist in some way. You do the research, you watch the webinars, you show up, you know, Instagram is full, like my friends, colleagues, like there's so much information out there now. We've got my podcast, Susan Guthrie's podcast, their podcasts all over galore. And so we have information now that, like I said, they did not have when I was a kid. They did everything wrong. My parents did everything wrong. And I'm, you know, I worked it out and I ended up being a, you know, fairly productive member of society, and I'm okay. But this is the most important thing, is how we support our kids through the transition, not whether or not to transition.
Well said. And I think you turned out just great.
Thanks.
Yes.
And I got a great kid too.
Yeah, I bet.
Yeah. Tian's on. Oh,
Oh.
she's not. She went away. She ran away. So that's sort of, I talk about all of that. I mean, basically almost everything I've talked about today, I talk about in my book. It's very well researched. A lot of my information a lot of the stuff that I write about in my book, I researched out of necessity, given the fact that, you know, I work with so many women. I work with hundreds of women as a divorce coach, throughout, the year. And I have a Facebook group that has over 17,000 women in it. That is one of the most active places I've ever been on the internet. So I hear the stories and the questions over and over and over again. And so it was really important to me to put together a book that answered all of the questions that I am asked all the time. It is a Susan Guthrie, who is amazing divorce attorney, mediator. She trains mediators now. She very much recommends this book, and other attorneys that I work with recommend this book to attorneys to give to clients who are in the contemplation stage. So it's a really great resource. And I say that, I know I wrote it, right? Of course it's a great resource, but I wrote it it's for women, because that's what I work with. But it really is, it's like I wrote it for them. And so I want them to have it. And so when I sort of talk about it and promote it, it's like, I don't care. Like I do care, of course I care, but really it's because I want women to have the answers to the questions that I know they're asking. because they ask me every day. So, all of that is in there. Chris, are we gonna talk now about the integration of technology and support systems?
We can
Kind of do
absolutely.
that. Where are we at
And
in our
well,
agenda?
well, I think that's perfect, and I think this is a good segue to talk about all of those things that we can use in our toolbox that are out there now. I mean, we have so many different ways to mitigate conflict in our divorce, and some of those things might be communication apps like Our Family Wizard, to devices like Soberlink to help mitigate conflict when there's accusations, or maybe someone has alcohol use disorder. But it's, again, I think I mentioned it a little earlier, it's just we want to make sure that we use it in a way that's not weaponizing the tool. Those are the things that I get most fearful of. But if we respect the best practices that are involved around the use of these technologies, they can be extremely useful in all divorce cases. And I really highly recommend that people use them. Even when we come to like software that helps calculate, different things for divorce, like family law software or whatnot, that those are great tools. So I think we're seeing the advancement of technology in the space of family law, and the more people, the more attorneys and that actually adopt these are really able to assist their clients in ways that they never have before.
Yeah, I could not agree more. I could not agree more. And I would definitely be fearful of people trying to weaponize this, but I also think that the way that you have developed the technology and your best practices and everything that you do around Soberlink, it really, it does lend itself to being a tool for good.
Yeah.
Not, yeah. Tian says we have 5 questions that will come back on screen and queue up once you tag me in. Cool. Is there anything else that we want to cover before Q&A?
No, I think we're at that point. So perfect segue.
Cool. Let's do it. Tian, you are tagged.
Hello. So the first question is for Soberlink. So for Chris, do any of the devices allow the other parent to track where the parent was when the test was submitted? It's a complaint allegation that they had recently.
Yeah, none of our devices track where you are when you take the test, or tracks you at any point. That's not part of the order. It's typically not what the parties agree on. And that's something that we were advised to take out of our technology, so that we could not be invasive, and in some states, not even supposed to do. So no, we do not have location tracking at Soberlink.
And then I know we already talked a little bit about the positive tests, but there's a I'll combine these 2 questions. What do you recommend if a party blows into the device and it's positive for alcohol? And then they also ask that sometimes arriving at safeguards that the parents want when there is a positive test is difficult after it already happens. So what's your input on setting up those safeguards before the positive test happens?
Sure. So I typically see in parenting plans, and Kate, I'm gonna tap you in too on this one, but I typically see a setup of a third party neutral that takes place when there is a positive test that takes place in a monitoring program. So let's say your spouse is struggling with alcohol, they're using Soberlink, they test positive, they retest positive, now all the alerts have gone out. And in the parenting plan, it would state at that point, this neutral would then go pick up the kids at that point. And typically that can be a family member, or I've seen it be other people. But a family friend or a family member is typically the ones that get designated as those neutrals. Kate, have you seen other things that have taken place in orders and parenting plans?
No, I mean, I think that's a really good one. I think it also depends on the legal custody agreement. Like I said, in my family, my ex has full legal and physical custody, so he actually gets to make those choices. But if there is, equal shared parenting, then yeah, it does need to be decided. It really does need to be decided. So a third, I think a neutral party is a really good idea. You also want to, I think it's important to assess the temperament, let's say, of both parties, right? And that and having them sign something in advance that says, listen, this is the protocol. Again, like, we're not arguing about this. This is not right. This is what it says. This is in our parenting plan. This is a legal document now. So this is what it said. It's so important so that when they fight back, if they're not sober, they're not going to be in their potentially in their right mind, right? And so they might argue and fight. And if it's just easier to say, this is actually a legally binding document. I actually don't have a choice. We can litigate this tomorrow, but for today, here it is in black and white. You signed it. This is the deal. I think that's the more important part, is to actually think it all the way through and ask all of the questions. Okay, what happens if, what happens if, what happens if? And the more we can ask that during the divorce process and the creation of the parenting plan, the better off we're going to be overall. A more stringent parenting plan that you can get loosey-goosey with is way better than a loosey-goosey parenting plan that you suddenly have to get more stringent with. That's my philosophy with parenting plans.
Yeah, I totally agree. One other thing that I saw was the importance of that first test when, let's say they're doing level 1 and they're going to have a unsupervised visitation and there's a pickup going to happen. It's important to make sure that that first test is compliant so that you can tell the kiddos that, hey, dad or mom is coming for this event. Or if they do test positive, you don't even have to tell the kids that dad tested or mom tested positive. It can be that, hey, something came up and the parent, the mom or dad is not going to come to the visit today. So
That's right.
It's how you set it up, how you word it is really important. And the way we can discreetly do things, can really happen. How we take the kid out of that house if there's a positive test. I know that might not be the easiest, but if the two parents have a relationship and they're communicating in a way that is respectful to one another, and there is some support of that person's AUD getting better and recovery being a goal, then
Yes.
these conversations just get easier. They really do.
And, I think that's really important what you just said too, Chris, that very often, I have a whole podcast called Not My Effing Job, which is really about, all the things that are, not my job anymore with a co-parent, right? But also, if I facilitate the sober journey of my co-parent, I can't do it for them. I can't facilitate it, but if I can support it, that's for my kids.
Mm-hmm.
Right? This is not, so this complete divorcing and shutting off, right? Look, for some people that is entirely appropriate and necessary, right? The complete parallel parenting, no contact, all of that. For some people, it's really necessary. And if there's somebody who's trying, if there's somebody who's actually stepping onto the field and attempting to get better and support their kids better, work with them. That may not be, if you can shift the mindset from it's for them and it's not my job to do their sober journey for them, to it's actually really good for my kids to have two sober parents, so I'm going to help and support that in any way that I can. It's really important.
Yeah, well said.
Yeah. We have kind of a technical question here. Discuss the tolerance levels compared to a police officer testing, and how do you have a company witness testify?
Sure. So, our our Soberlink device contains a professional grade fuel cell sensor with a detection rate of, I believe it's 0.00 6 and above, and then all the way to 0.4. So that's a big range, but that is similar to what we see with police grade breathalyzers, similar technology with fuel cell technology. So it's all right there. The biggest difference between our technology and what you'd see at a roadside breathalyzer is that our technology is self-administered. When I am doing this, I'm doing it with myself, and it's using facial recognition software to confirm identity. On a roadside test, Mr. Officer is telling me to breathe into it and administering the test to me. So a big difference there, but yes, that's what we're seeing. The internal technologies are very similar, and that's what makes our system so trusted. When we talk about the second part of that question, can you remind me what the second part of that question was?
Yeah, about having a company witness testify.
That's right. So we do testify, but I do recommend for all attorneys to be part of the monitoring agreement up front. I think that's super important. You can all be added to the monitoring agreement as additional contacts, and once you're added as an additional contact, you can request certified records from our custodian of record, and they will actually submit you records with a signed affidavit and notarized, so that you can submit that as certified records in court, where you don't need to subpoena the records. But if you do need someone to come testify about the technology or whatnot, or the programs or the best use, we do have a portion on our website dedicated to professionals, where you can go and find out how to do that. And it's under attorney section. And I think we can put that in the chat for everyone that is listening. Perfect.
Yes. And then one more technical question. If a Soberlink user tests 2 hours late, but the test shows 0.000, is it likely that 2 hours earlier they could have tested positive? If yes, how positive?
Yeah, that's a technical question that has many variables attached to it, because elimination rates are very difficult from person to person. It can be based on gender, how long you've been drinking. It can be on your weight. So there's so many different things that affect somebody's elimination rate of alcohol. Could they have had alcohol in their system 2 hours ago? Yes. But what is the average elimination rate? They say for every hour it's 0.001 or 0.02, somewhere in that range. So per hour, depending on elimination rates.
Awesome. And then last question here, does the test show the recipient the BAC level or just a positive/negative result?
So it does show you the actual BAC level. So you will know what their BAC level was at the time they took the test. Remember, that's the key to using a breathalyzer as your monitoring, is that you know exactly what the BAC level was when the person took that positive test. Good question.
Those are all the questions. Any last words from you two?
Well, I'll start with, I just enjoyed being here with Kate. Her book, again, is a great resource. I recommend it to anyone that's contemplating divorce. I think that's something that should be read. And look for her podcast too. There's some exciting ones out there, but hers is great. And thanks again for letting us talk.
Thanks, Chris. Thanks for all of that. And I, the love goes right back. I think the work that you guys are doing is amazing, and it's so useful and helpful. And your attitude and perspectives about it are, I think, what make it actually important. So thanks for everything you guys do.
Thank you.
Awesome.
Okay, well, thank you, everyone. We will send out all the links that we talked about, a link to the D Word book, Kate's book. We'll send out all the other links that Chris mentioned. If you have any other questions, you can answer in that email as well. We'll also be sending out a brief survey, and we really appreciate your feedback. So if you can fill that out, that'd be great. And we'll also be sending out a personalized certificate of attendance in the next few days to everyone who attended. And I will put my email in the chat. So if you have any other questions, let me know. Thank you all
Thanks,
so much.
Tian, for setting us up. All
Yes.
right.
Thanks, Tian. Yes, thank you guys. Thanks everyone for being here.
Bye.
Bye.